The Blast Manchester Major is less than a week away. It's the first time we get to see how teams will compete at an international stage following SI and a brand new meta shift, and plenty of action happened during Roster Mania. It was nuts. So what I'm going to do is go over each of the teams that qualified for Manchester and discuss their stage 1 as well as gauge their chances at winning the major. But first, a quick reminder for those unaware. In addition to reducing the number of teams at each major from 24 in 2023 to 20 for 2024, Blast and Ubisoft also made an adjustment to the format for the majors from 2024 and potentially onwards. Playoffs remained untouched from last year, so top 8 teams on the main stage in front of a crowd. That's a given. Phase 2 of this format will remain the same, but the teams that auto-qualified have been increased from 8 to 12, and there's also a wildcard system for the leagues that don't inherently have a Phase 2 slot. I'll explain how that works later. And Phase 1 is where most of the changes comes in, with only the top 4 teams from the remaining 8 that made it there going through in a double elimination bracket, not too dissimilar to how SI's playoff bracket works. And so with that out of the way, let's start with North America's contingent for Manchester because, oh boy, a lot came from there. In a stage that saw an all-Brazilians team join the NAL and the laughing stock of the league finally getting their license revoked, we see the other org that has been at the bottom of the barrel not only dig themselves out of dead last, but qualified for their first major as the number 1 seed from North America. Yeah, I am talking about Beast Coast. In an off-season that saw Gunner, Hot and Cold, Spirit, Gamini, and Diffuser join the fold, Beast Coast shot up the rankings for the NAL and snatched the crown from M80, at least for stage 1. First place in the group stage, including a forfeit win against Date That Shall Not Be Named, which got reversed, is insane for this org. But they took until day 4 to get their first win. After that, foot to the floor for the rest of the stage, including the playoffs. The only map they dropped after that first win was against Dark Zero in the semis. Now, does that insane performance in stage 1 translate to the org's maiden major appearance? Well, that depends. All but Diffuser have international LAN experience prior to joining Beast Coast, and Hot and Cold and Gunner can absolutely temper the other boys and keep them grounded. But there's going to be a lot of eyes on them following their meteoric rise to the top, as well as a high degree of expectation. I reckon they can make a pretty deep run at Manchester, but I don't see them making main stage. At least not yet. I don't think they have the collective experience together for them to truly make any noise. And keep in mind, this will be the first time that these guys are playing together on LAN. So I wouldn't be surprised if any teething troubles potentially hindered on their collective debut. But I will also be pleasantly surprised if things go smoothly and they run roughshod over the rest of the teams in Manchester. As for the team they beat in the NAL, I don't have as high hopes for. M80 were the best team in North America all of last year, but they have fallen flat at every single international LAN appearance they went to. Even getting grouped at SI was dismal for them. Now, you could make the argument that being in the group of death, the odds were stacked against them from the jump. And yes, I can see that argument. But when you only win 1 of your last 11 matches on a LAN, that doesn't look good for you. Domestically, they were fantastic all last year, with first place in both stages last year, and they would have continued that record if it weren't for Beast Coast. Third place in groups, while not a bad start, doesn't really speak to the talent on the list. They were actually tied on points with Beast Coast and Oxygen on 16 points apiece. The reason M80 was third? Round difference. They were able to make quick work of SSG in the quarterfinals and sent OXG down to the lower bracket in the semis, but they couldn't match the firepower of this new Beast Coast lineup. The inclusion of Citizen, Noodle, and Cameraman may be good on paper, and they may all be proven gunners against Spoit and Kino, but if this lineup doesn't gel together properly and they bow out early in Manchester, then the question needs to be asked not just of the players, but of the coaching staff as well. And for this reason, I don't see this iteration of M80's super team idea going far with this major. I want to be wrong, I just don't see it happening. And the last team from NA to go straight to Phase 2 is the old hand of Dark Zero. This time 2 years ago, they won the Charlotte Major over Australis in a cracking All-American Grand Final. But since then, they haven't quite been up to the same standards they set for themselves 2 years ago. That said, they have made main stage in the last 2 LAN appearances, including a top 6 berth at SI earlier in the year. And this was the same event they brought Nave over from the old M&M gaming core from Yule, as well as bringing Bolo out of retirement. After a shaky start to the NAL regular bracket, they managed to right the ship just in time for playoffs, where they took Luminosity and Oxygen Esports to task on their way to third. The only blemish was a 2-1 loss to Beast Coast in the semis. Now, internationally, Dark Zero are usually pretty good. Inconsistent, but good nonetheless. And I would expect the same here, if the level of competition in other regions wasn't as high as it is. However, the level of experience and talent on this team should be enough to at least make a deep run in Manchester. I say should, but I could be wrong. Usually I'm on such things. And the final team from North America, the one to qualify to Phase 1 through the LCQ that wrapped up about a week or so ago, Space Station Gaming. And I'm going to be honest with you, they are a goddamn anomaly. Lost both their playoff matches against M80 and Luminosity respectively, but then go into the LCQ and do a clean sweep by putting the new iteration of Makers to task, giving Luminosity a proper hiding in a revenge match from the NAL, and made the Sonics look like chumps. In that order. What? SSG was doing the same thing in the 2022 season, leaving it to the very end to blitz the rest of the comp. And that was with their formal lineup of Bosco, Faults, Hot and Cold, Rampy, and Yeti. Even after nuking that lineup last year and starting almost completely from scratch, and the addition of Iconic for Hot and Cold after SI this year, they're still pulling their shit off. It took Ashen, Iconic, Faults, Forest, and J90 an entire stage for the things to gel properly, and it only truly clicked into place during the LCQ for them to earn a spot in Manchester. But because of that sluggish start, SSG are on the back foot and have to do this the hard way. Which doesn't give me enough confidence to say they can make a deep run at this major. They have the talent and experience to absolutely do it, but if they don't come out of the blocks firing on all cylinders straight from the gate, then they're looking at an early exit. Heading across the pond, we move to Europe's delegation for Manchester. And if you thought Beast Coast getting top seed for NA was a bombshell, wait till you see who Europe is sending. Or rather, who they're not sending. Let's begin with the top seed out of Europe, BDS. A team very familiar to fans and long-time viewers of Siege, with a very storied and prolific history throughout the competitive scene. However, they did hit a roadblock for the 2023 season. They didn't make the Copenhagen Major this time last year, and couldn't make up the SI points they needed for Atlanta, which meant they missed out on SI for the first time in the org's history in 2024, breaking a 4-year streak that began back in 2020. Following the setback, they parted ways with longtime veterans Alems and Renshiro during the offseason, and picked up Torrent and users from the old M&M gaming core. The impact was immediate, taking first place in the regular stage and dropping only one match against Ents, who are returning to Siege after an extended break. This carried over into the playoffs as well, dropping only one map in the grand final throughout their entire playoff run. It's clear BDS want to make up for missing Sao Paulo earlier in the year, and they're currently taking the right steps towards that with a very strong stage 1. And I reckon they have a better than average chance of making the main stage in Manchester. As for winning it, I'm not so sure. It just comes down to who the rest of the regions are sending and how well they do. I'm confident they can at least get something done. As for winning it, I'm not so sure. Yet. Making their Tier 1 debut in Manchester from Europe is a brand new org from the United Kingdom called Into the Breach, who joined the European League in Stage 2 last year, replacing the now defunct TT9. And they actually did pretty well in that stage for an org that was more or less thrown into the deep end, with 3rd place in their group and 6th overall. In fact, ITB almost made it to the Atlanta Major through the LCQ, but were felled at the last hurdle by G2. During the offseason, they parted ways with Yonka and Kantaraketi, and brought in 2 rookies from Tier 2 in Creeds and Oscar, the latter of which had a very brief stint on Team Secret during South Breach as a stand-in due to them not having a full lineup for the tournament. Stage 1 groups was actually pretty solid for these guys, with 3rd place overall, taking wins of G2, Virtus Pro, and the Wolves along the way. And they beat G2 for a second time during playoffs, as well as getting revenge against Team Secret. But they couldn't quite pull it off against BDS in the grand final, although they did come close. The thing is, as good as that stage was for ITB, I don't think they'll do as well on the international stages. All but Kendrew are completely new to this. Not to say they shouldn't be proud of what they've done already this year. They absolutely should be. This is a huge moment for these guys. They've displaced some of the most prolific teams in Europe to even get to their first major. That's already huge. Anything beyond this point, icing on the cake. This will be a huge learning experience for these guys, and they're coming in with no expectations. They can just soak all this up and take in what they learned for the future. I know I'm a nose boy and I have my own biases, obviously, but I'm excited to see what these boys can do going forward. And the last team to qualify through the regular season is Team Secret. What, you thought it'd be G2, Wolves, or Fnatic? So did I. The fact that Secret have been in competitive Siege for as long as they have, almost as long as G2, just goes to show how tenacious this org is. But that tenacity has finally paid off with their first major appearance since Raleigh 2019. 6 years. That's how long it's been since major appearances. And before you say anything, yes, I'm aware that they did make it to SI in 2023, but that was through the LCQ, and I'm only talking majors for this bit, as they're completely different tournaments. So put the torches and the pitchforks away, and get off my case! Alongside Savage and Grubby, Twister has pulled together bits and bobs from Heroic's old lineup in June, a Tier 2 rookie and former teammate of Creed's in Adrian, and Miracle from Furia's old lineup. Despite all these puzzle pieces, they somehow managed to come together in time for Stage 1. Second place overall in the group stage, Secret looked set to book their tickets for Manchester, only to fall to ITB 2-0 in the semis, therefore dropping them down to the third place match against the Wolves. But after dropping the first map, they held their nerve on overtime match point in map 3 to earn their place in the major on their second attempt. Most of this lineup does have international experience, with Miracle's time on Furia back in 2022 being the most crucial piece for them right now. Despite that, I don't think that's enough for them to progress deep into the event, although that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is a new lineup that not a lot of people are expecting to make waves in the same way that, say, beastcoast is for North America. If Team Secret is smart, they'll use this chance to take away as much experience as they can and apply it for Stage 2. Like with ITB, this is already a huge deal for these guys, and they should make the most of it. And the last team from Europe? G2 Esports. Oh, how the mighty are fallen. This time last year, they were on top of the world with the org's second Six Invitational hammer. Now they are struggling within Europe and having to qualify to Manchester through the LCQ. The lineup remains the same from their back half of 2023 and their 2024 SI run. Alemo, Benjamaster, Doki, Uno, and Virtue. All of them are proven talent in a LAN environment, but every single one of them seems to be down on form in one way or another. 6th place in groups in Yule, tied on 11 points with Fnatic, lost to ITB in the first round of the playoffs to send them down to the LCQ seeding match, 5th place, and secured 5th place overall with a 2-0 against the Orange outfit. But it's what they did during the LCQ run that gives me pause for concern. They didn't drop a map in any of their matches. All but one were won in regulation. G2 are a proven World Championship org 2 times. And most of this current lineup, except for Uno, were part of that second SR win back in 23. But their last 2 major qualifications, Atlanta and now Manchester, were done through the European LCQ. Granted, 4th place at SI is nothing to sneeze at, but they need to make this major count if they want to have a chance of qualifying for 2025. Sailing back over the Atlantic, we move to Brazil. And it's who you'd expect to find here, albeit under a different name for one team, as well as a new org making their international debut in Manchester. The thing is though, if you look back at all the grand final matchups for the last 3 LAN events, that is Copenhagen, Atlanta, and now Sao Paulo, they've all been Brazilian teams. This region of titans have become the gatekeepers of competitive Siege. You want an international trophy? Get through us first. And I genuinely don't know if anyone can. But let's begin with the second best team in the world, FaZe Clan. Runners-up at the last World Championship, previous major winners back in Sweden in 2021, this organization has been at the top of Brazilian Siege for many, many years. And they're showing no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Left unchanged following their heartbreaking loss to W7M at SI, Cyber, Souls, Handy, KDS, and Vidaking went undefeated in the regular season, and didn't drop a map in their playoff bracket, even defeating the new Furia team in 2 maps in the semis. FaZe Clan have always had a high level of form throughout every tournament they've appeared in, and when they do drop off in form, they're usually quick to bounce back the next stage. These boys are extremely ruthless when they're on song, and they've shown they can win an International LAN. Both Cyber and Souls were on that Sweden major winning lineup all those years ago, and KDS was part of the Team 1 Mexico winning major team as well. So FaZe absolutely have the experience to add another major to the trophy cabinet, and they're absolutely hungry for it. But the problem is Brazil itself. It is so competitive, and the quality of that region is leagues above the rest of the world, and FaZe has fallen victim every single time. They were knocked out in the semis of both majors by the runners-up of both those events, Team Liquid in Copenhagen and Los One in Atlanta. And while they did make the grand final appearance in SI, they lost in overtime to W7M in the most gut-wrenching way possible. I have no doubt these boys will make a deep run in Manchester, but if FaZe Clan want to return to the top of the mountain, there's a very good chance I'll need to get past like Brazilian compatriots to do it. Our newest team out of Brazil to make their international debut in Manchester is E1 Esports. And not much is known about the org itself, aside from them debuting in the Brazil League of Stage 2 last year. The lineup floated around a little bit initially with Raps, Dodes, Sexy Cake, Astro, and Lukid for that stage, but they've all moved on to greener pastures with other teams and leagues. Now the lineup is Arthur, Flastry, Empties, Perez, and STK. The latter two with previous experience on the international stage with Black Dragons and Furia respectively. Stage 1 for these guys wasn't all that flash hot, at least to start with, as they just barely managed to scrape into the playoffs, finishing the group stage in 6th on 12 points. And to put it into context for you, MIBR, who was 7th, had 11 points. That's how close E1 was to not even making the playoffs. But they did. And they went on a tear in the playoffs by defeating both Black Dragons and the new W7M team 2-0 in that order to book their tickets to Manchester. And W7M was 2nd in groups. Just think about that for a second. They did end up losing to FaZe Clan 2-0 in the grand final, but it doesn't matter, as their job was already done. In terms of experience, E1 might be the weakest team from Brazil this major compared to the rest of Brazil's contingent. But that doesn't mean they should be treated as such. Even the weakest Brazilian squads can still give the rest of the world a run for their money. Just look at Los from Atlanta last year for proof. These guys have a good opportunity to play spoiler during Phase 2 in Manchester. Any team that drops a match against them should be very concerned for the rest of their run. And now we come to the odds-on favourite for Manchester. Your reigning double major and world champions, W7M. No, hang on. Furia, that's it. Sorry, got confused there for a second. These boys may have a new home for 2024, but don't think for a second that because Felipox, Hertz, JB92, KZ, and Nade have changed orgs in the offseason, they aren't as hungry as they were when they were with the Bulls. Because I'll bet you any money they're just as eager as before, especially now that they have a dynasty to uphold following their flawless run throughout the last 12 months. However, their domestic results haven't been as stellar, although I will concede that might come down to the level of competition within Brazil itself. 4th place in groups, getting 2-0 by FaZe Clan in the semis. Things weren't looking good for this squad going into the bronze medal match against their former org in W7M. But they held their nerve and managed to overcome the Bulls to head to Manchester as the 3rd seed out of Brazil. I don't really have a lot to say about Furia's expectations, but I will say that they are going to have a huge target on their backs after SI. Teams are going to be counter-stratting against them hard, looking for any weaknesses they may have, any chinks in their defense. There's a lot of pressure on these 5 boys, but after their grand final showing at SI, I reckon they'll be just fine. In fact, I think they may be continuing their streak in Manchester by taking the whole thing. I've just cursed them, probably. We'll see. And the final team out of Brazil that qualified for Phase 1 through the LCQ, Team Liquid. And if you thought G2 was having a rough, wait to hear about Liquid's run of results. 2nd place at Copenhagen this time last year. Failed to even make the Atlanta major, but still had enough SI points to make Sao Paulo. Knocked out in the 2nd round of the lower bracket at SI, despite finishing 3rd in the group of death and starting in the upper bracket. Their only playoff win was against Team Falcons in the lower bracket. Very, very inconsistent for 2023. So they part ways with Volps and bring in Maya from the old Los lineup in the hopes that they bring some much needed consistency. Well, that didn't work, as I only got 8th place in Stage 1, missing the playoffs altogether, but still managing to snag some much needed global standings points, as the top 8 teams in each regional league get SI points every stage. Liquid then go almost flawless in the Open Qualifier, dropping only one map against the E1 Academy team. They then head to the LCQ. They again go almost flawlessly on their way to Manchester, this time dropping only one map to W7M. Like with G2, Nesk, Palu, Resets, Lagonis, and Maya are more than capable in the right environment, and they are some of the best players in the world. But their window is closing fast, and I reckon that SI 2025 will be Nesk and Palu's last chance to raise the hammer before they either leave Liquid or retire altogether. These boys need to put their best foot forward from here on out, and they cannot afford any more mistakes. One slip up, and that's their year gone. Heading over to the land of the rising sun, we have 2 teams heading to the major, both of which should be familiar to Siege fans, both new and old. Let us begin our tour through the East with the team that won Stage 1 of the Japan League, Scars, who had something of a rollercoaster for 2023 season. Main stage appearance at the Copenhagen Major to kick off their debut event in the top flight of Siege, which is a hell of a statement to make. Sadly, they couldn't back it up in the next 2 LAN appearances. Knocked out really early in Phase 2 in Atlanta, and didn't even make the playoffs at SI despite being the 5th seed in the world on global standings points. Domestically, however, these guys are really good. Their results in the Japan League in the last 14 months or so are nothing to sneeze at. First place in both stages last year, with a first place this stage to back it up. I will point out that in the group stage, they were actually tied on points with a second place Vite? I'll figure it out later. It was Scars' better round difference that got them the number 1 seed going into playoffs. But then they proceeded to clean house against Exist and Kinotrop Gaming with 2-0 wins on both occasions, and it wasn't even a contest in either match. The thing is though, I feel that's very much a double-edged sword. They were fantastic domestically, but their international record leaves a lot to be desired from the Japanese, especially when they effectively went unchanged for last year. Fish like Teo, Rek, YSQ1, I apologize if I butchered that name, I am sorry. They're all still in the lineup, with Pion being moved to sub and Nina from Northampton coming in to take his place. As much as I want the APAC regions to match it with the best in the world, I don't see Scars making much of an impact in Manchester this year. I'm predicting another early exit. I don't want it to be the case, but recent history is working against them. And the other team out of Japan is CAG Osaka, better known to Siege fans as Cyclops. Now, these guys are something of a persistent presence in both APAC North and the Japan League, even though their international results aren't overly stellar. I mean, getting eliminated in the group stage in almost every single LAN appearance doesn't exactly inspire confidence. And CAG didn't even make it to SI earlier in the year to cap off a rather mediocre 2023 season. And to make it worse, they lose Akali, and Suzuki moves off the starting 5 to become their next analyst. So they bring in Surenko and Shuri from Crest Gaming and Northampton respectively, and set to work for the new season. And it almost worked. They remained in the top 2 throughout the entire group stage up to the final day, where they lost to Scars and tumbled down to 4th after several other results worked against them. They lose their first playoff match against Exist to get sent down to 5th match against Father's Back. Yes, that is legit. No, I am never saying that again. Cyclops did book their spot in the LCQ after taking FB down 2-0 rather convincingly, but were almost knocked down to the lower bracket in the first round because of an overtime match win against Crest. Thankfully, they were able to keep their nose clean for the rest of the bracket and book their spot for Manchester. Now, while they are a regular sight at the international level, if they want to remain relevant, they've got to make a deep run to Manchester and not get grouped again. Please don't let history repeat itself, boys. Moving to South Korea, and this region had a bit of a shake-up towards the back half of 2023 and before Stage 1 of this year. 2 teams went to SI, D plus Kia and Furax. The former kings of South Korea got eliminated by a bunch of upstart Aussies in groups, and the team that has been around the longest in APAC only just made it to the lower bracket of the playoffs, but no further than round 1. And now, there's a new top dog in Korea. The union of the French PSG esports and the Korean Talon esports have birthed a new dominant force in the South Korean league, PSG Talon. But what makes this all even scarier is who they have as their head coach. None other than everyone's favorite suite of few words. Yeah, you heard me right. Fabian is Talon's new head coach. And his multiple hammer-winning experience has had a massive impact on this org right off the bat. Third place in the group stage, with all their losses in overtime, I might add, and that momentum carried through to the playoffs. Talon dropped only 2 maps throughout the entire playoff run, against T Plus in the semis and against Furia in the grand final. But like with groups, they were both in overtime, and the rest of the maps they played weren't even close. Even 7-0ing Blossom in the first round of the playoffs. But that's just within 2024. If we were to take Talon's original results from 2023, then things don't look as good. Yes, they did make the Atlanta Major, but that was through the LCQ, and they got knocked out in play-ins. That said, PSG have stuck with Talon's lineup of JLT, Misa, Ryder, Royboy, and Soldier. And it's paying off. Domestically. Their true test is going to be on the international stage and how well Fabian's system works for these boys on LAN. Getting a fast pass straight to phase 2 will absolutely help them. And Fabian's international coaching experience will be a huge boon for them. But they need to make the most of this run for it to pay off in the long run. And the other South Korean team to make it to Manchester through the LCQ, Furia. Like with KAG in Japan, this team has been a mainstay from within Korea under the guise of one org or another, whether it be their original Mantis FPS moniker, or Cloud9, or Sandbox Gaming. But also like with Cyclops, Furia don't have a lot of international results to shout about. The best it's ever gotten was the quarterfinals of the Sweden Major back in 2021, where they failed to survive the Korean Gauntlet against the then-named Damwon Kit Gaming. But at the Yeongchaping Major 12 months later, they get sent home in groups without even winning a map. They've always had the potential and the talent, but when you think they've turned around the corner, Furia takes several steps back. The majors last year are prime examples of this. 17th to 20th in Copenhagen, but 21st to 24th in Atlanta. However, they did turn it around for SI, and they did make it to the lower bracket by stunning GK Esports on the last day of groups. But then they got matched up against W7M in the lower bracket in their only playoff match, and the rest is history. However, it is worth pointing out that the inclusion of Rin from DK prior to SI was part of the reason why they were even able to make it out of groups in the first place. So, it's a step in the right direction. Nova has also changed roles to become a player once again, but that didn't truly come into play until after Arakaze left the team along with the original member of that FPS core in NB Taylor. So the lineup for Furia during stage 1 was Demic, Goodboy, Maffy, Nova, and Rin. Now, they did stall out a little bit during the group stage with only 4th place, so not the best of starts to a new season. But they did send Beyond Stratus Gaming and WBL packing during the playoffs, and they took PSG Talon Map 3 in the grand final, but they couldn't get over the line. However, they did go flawless in the upper bracket of their LCQ before meeting D Plus in the grand final. And they won their place in Manchester in overtime on Map 3, showing that they can win dirty when necessary. The loss of MV Taylor will be felt in Manchester, as he was the most stable group of that lineup. But if they want to reclaim the Korean crown from PSG Talent and truly resurrect themselves, the Furia need to look to the future for this major run to matter. Doesn't have to be a deep run, but there has to be signs of life moving forward. Heading down south towards our final stop through the east, we come to the plucky Asia, the beating heart of the old APAC team. While not the most successful time of it this year, there were a couple of teams that stood tall above the rest, and one in particular seems to have something of a cult following. Bleed Esports are Asia's sole representative for Manchester following the reduction of major slots for the 2024 season. And I think there's no one better at the moment. During their SI run, they showed us who they were and how likable they were, even bringing a rather fishy mascot for their games. Rumor is that Joel may be making a return from Manchester. And that's what these boys are. They're funny, energetic, they're clearly having fun, And most importantly, they are exciting to watch. If it weren't for the fact I have a deep-seated OS bias, I would be rooting for Bleed. That SI run in particular was impressive as well, surviving the group of death pretty convincingly, and even making it to the second round of the lower bracket, knocking out the Red Hot Los in the previous round. They just couldn't match against SSG in the second round. Now, a big reason for this was their new coach who came in just before SI. Ex-NIP and W7M legend and former coach of M&M Gaming, Julio. Just like with Fabian for PSG Talon, Julio has had a massive positive influence for the lineup of Asfi, Hovenhurst, Mentalist, Reaps, and Turdster. Again, that's his real name. Who went unchanged for the new season, of which I'm a huge fan of. Nearly flawless in the group stage, dropping only one match to elevate, but it was still good enough to get first going into playoffs. They dropped Direwolf 2-0 in the semis, on their way to meet Furia in the grand final, and beat them 2-1 to make their second major appearance following Atlanta. Following a huge upswing in both skill and popularity over the last 8 or so months, Bleed are looking to make waves in Manchester and have the momentum behind them to make it happen. But they gotta get through phase 1 first in order to do that. And that's not going to be easy given who else is in that bracket. However, if anyone can do it, it's these guys. And Joel. Moving east towards MENA, and this region had a pretty impressive first 12 months in the top flight of the competition. 2 squads made their international debuts, one at each major, and both were pretty strong showings. Team Falcons made phase 2 in Copenhagen, and actually made it to the lower bracket of SI earlier in the year, before getting eliminated by Team Liquid. However, the other team actually did better in one event, and was rather poor in the next. GK Esports are our MENA reps from Manchester, and I have mixed feelings on this squad. If we just look at their major record, then they are fantastic. Made it through the play-ins and the Swiss stage to get into the quarterfinals. They get matched up against W7M and actually took a map off the Brazilians on their way to the major title. That was a statement in itself. However, it was a caveat. They did it without their full squad, as one of them had visa issues and couldn't even get to Atlanta. So they did their whole run without Seriously and with Leader as their sub. Okay. They then go to SI and couldn't win a single match in their group, even with their squad back at full strength. And do you know what makes it even worse for GK? On the final day of groups, they go up against FearX, who were also on the cusp of being eliminated. Not only did the Koreans steal the win from the Middle Eastern team in 2 standard maps, they get 7-0'd on their map pick. How was that even possible? But as much as their SI result didn't make sense, what they did during Oceania made even less sense. Hasham and Noodle both depart for greener pastures. The head coach and analyst also leave, I believe due to internal differences, leaving GK with massive holes to fill. So they get a new coach from Brazil, presumably following in the trend that Julio set with Bleed. And they bring in 3 new players to make it a 6-man squad, similar to what Falcons did during the 23 season. Seems reasonable on paper, until you learn who they brought in. A relatively unknown gunner in Tier 2 in Awfulcon, who didn't even play at all during Stage 1, I might add, Blaz, and Neskin. They went from an Englishman to a Frenchman, and added a Brazilian on top of that. I have no doubt about the skills and experience of either of them. But when you put both of them in a predominantly Arabic-speaking side, the phrase language barrier immediately comes to mind. That said, it does so far seem to be working with the first place in their league. But it did come down to the final play day to lock in their spot. It kind of feels like GK are throwing money around to fix a problem that ultimately comes down to the fundamental basics. We've seen this org at its best and its worst within the span of 6 months. So it's up to them to find that middle ground. But when you have 3 new players, a new coach, and an analyst who you picked up literally less than 5 days ago, that's a lot to ask for. Despite their Cinderella run at Atlanta, I don't have hopes of GK repeating in Manchester. they're going to go out pretty early in the playing stage. I can just feel it. And now we come to the unfortunate elephant in the room. The only region to not have representation at the Sixth Invitational earlier this year, Latin America. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that the level of competition in LATAM is down compared to the rest of the world, with Oceania not being too far above them. The only time that Latin America made it out of Phase 1 was Copenhagen with Revan E-Club, but they were among the first to be knocked out in Phase 2. Now, there is an explanation for this, and it actually goes back to the old Copa Elite Six system that was in place for LATAM before Blast took over, blew the whole ecosystem to pieces, and rebooted the regional layout. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of how CES works because that's a whole video in and of itself. But if you do want to know, I'm going to link a video in the description from CaliberJacob about how Copa worked and how ultimately unfair the system was. TLDR, Mexico and South America were utterly suffocated by the Titans of Brazil when it came to major qualifications, which was why Brazil was separated from the rest of LATAM for Blast regional leagues. But the other issue LATAM has is that there are no standout teams from the region. No one that fans can immediately point to and say, hey, there's such and such from that region. They're awesome. There's no one team carrying the torch for LATAM. And the latest product from the region has a lot on their shoulders for this major. Team Cruelty is the 5th team in 3 majors to make their international debut for LATAM, behind Six Karma, Alpha Theris, Knights, Revan. And there isn't a hell of a lot I have on this Mexican lineup in results. 6th and 7th for Stage 1 and 2 last year respectively. Semifinals for the Copenhagen LCQ, didn't even make Atlanta's LCQ. So for the 2024 season, Team Cruelty do a reset on their lineup. All but Rovi part ways from the org, with Guicho becoming their new analyst. And they bring in Ivan, Mutombo, and Toski from the now disbanded Alpha Theris, and the newly minted 18-year-old Pyroxis from the Phoenix Esports Academy team. With this lineup, they took first place within LATAM North during the division stage, which gave them a fast pass to the upper bracket semifinals. They then went flawless in the playoffs with wins against Knights, Six Karma, and Vasco Esports in that order. The thing is, though, they didn't look overly strong throughout the bracket until the very end. They needed all 12 maps against both the Knights and Six Karma, and their first grand final map win needed all 15 rounds in overtime. It wasn't until they took Vasco's pick of Cafe off them 7-2 that they looked particularly strong. I still don't have a lot of confidence in Cruelty to make a deep run in Manchester, despite my wanting this region to improve. So, as much as I hate to say it, it's going to be another LATAM team biting the dust early. Now, you may have noticed up to this point that I have not talked about the final team that made it straight to Phase 2. That was because I was deliberately saving them for last, and there is a very good reason for this. No, it's not because of regional bias or favoritism. If you recall at the top of the video, I said that Blast had introduced a wildcard system for Phase 2 of the 2024 season, meaning that the 4 semi-closed regional leagues, Latin America, Asia, Middle East and North Africa, and Oceania, can compete for a fast pass straight to the Swiss stage of any major, completely bypassing the play-ins altogether. How it works is this. The team from any of those 4 regions with the highest placed finish in any marquee tournament wins the slot for that region in the following event. Because Team Bliss got the highest placed finish at SI with a top 8 finish, the Oceanic region as a whole was given the wildcard slot for Manchester. Seems pretty straightforward. Well, not so fast, because there's an extra kink. OCE is automatically locked out of that wildcard slot for the Montreal Major later in the year, leaving it wide open for the remaining 3 leagues. I have my own thoughts on that, but that's for another time. As for who qualified for most, come on. Was there ever any doubt that Team Bliss would return the international stage? I'm wearing their shirt, for God's sake. Undefeated in the group stage, dropping only 1 map in the semifinals against the newly formed Antic Esports, and they put on a clinic against Man LFO Esports in the 2-0 grand final showing. I actually watched these boys live during the playoffs, and they're clearly switched on and energetic, and they were lively in the player cams. They're enjoying what they do. What might potentially hurt them in Manchester is that they didn't look all that challenged. Going flawless in a region like OSA is one thing. Not to throw shade at the rest of the league, there are some extremely talented boys that could give Bliss a run for their money one day. But going from being a large fish in a very small pond to being in a minnow in a sea of sharks is another. Not to say that Bliss can't handle the pressure, as evidenced by that SI run in Brazil. And I'm going to give you something of a hot take. This will be Team Bliss's best shot on making their main stage debut, if they continue to ride this momentum from SI and O Stage 1. Yeah, I said it. I just hope I didn't curse them. If they can weather the pressure storm coming their way and bring their A game against the world's best, then they're within half a shot of making main stage. No way in hell they'll win it, but still, main stage is huge for these guys. Which reminds me, where the hell's my copium canister? So that does it for now. I'll be back over the course of the Manchester Major for predictions during each stage. I will try to get them out either the day of or day before each phase is set to begin, but there is no guarantee. I did also see that the playing bracket was released, and ooh, that's going to be very juicy. I'll try to get that just after the weekend is done. But until then, this is your resident Silver Wolf, signing out.